To rebuild the Palisades, if the city of LA continues with its current process, it will take about a year of just reviewing plans. My guest today is Michael Bohn. He's with the American Institute of Architects. Today he's here to tell us what's the normal process of getting permits in Los Angeles and what the city should do to expedite the process so that these communities get rebuilt fast. I'm Siam Korami. Welcome to California Insider. It's great to have you on. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, this is a very tough time for LA. After the fires, a lot of people are wondering how are we going to rebuild this, given that there's a lot of challenges with construction and permitting and bureaucracy. And you're an expert in this field. You guys have been watching this. You've been watching the state of California. Can you tell us your thoughts about what's happening in LA?
Well, just briefly, even before the fires, our entire state was in a housing crisis. We're 3.5 million units or homes short from what the demand requires. And in that, it breeds a lot of unfortunate outcomes like homelessness and people spending way more money than they should on housing. And I believe in LA County, we have 75,000 people living on the street. In the city of LA, about 50,000. In the entire state, I think it's about 175,000. So we were in a crisis before this happened, the fires. And to your point, it is a tragedy. And unfortunately, it's going to have even a greater impact on our housing supply. Now you have thousands of people that have lost their homes in the last week, need to find temporary housing, or may decide to purchase a home. And this just puts additional pressure on an already intensely tight housing market.
And in terms of rebuilding these homes, what is going to take to rebuild them?
It could take a long time. California is one of the most difficult places to build in the country. I think with the large amount of housing that's going to need to be rebuilt, we need to look at the process differently. And the governor did, I believe last Sunday, circumvent CEQA and the Coastal Commission, and those are very positive signs. I believe today or yesterday the Mayor Bass had said she will expedite the approval process, but we need to get more specific about what that means in order for it to be effective. If somebody would like to have a house, many times they hire an architect and they going to the planning, creating some drawings that describe the character of the building, how big it is, how tall it is, how many square feet, where it's located on the site. And then the planning department reviews it for conformance. And the goal is to gain entitlement or an approval that this project is allowed on the site. And once that is achieved...
And how long does that take?
Well, the entire, just for single-family homes, the entire approval process that I'll go through can take 9 months to a year. With just the planning process, it can take many months and even a year depending if it's in the coastal zone or if there's other environmental impacts that potentially could affect an area. So it takes a long time with good intentions, but unfortunately, it's come to the point now where there are other negative results that have occurred, meaning the lack of housing in our region. You have this planning process, you gain your entitlement, and that then allows the architect to develop drawings for construction. Very technical drawings that describe how this building should look like when it's completed. And that set of drawings then goes to the building department. And the building department reviews the drawings for a different level of code requirements. Are there proper fire ratings? Are there proper exiting? Lots of requirements. Energy consumption. Is the building using too much energy? And so that takes, again, several months to review and approve. Those are typically the two largest processes, but then you also have public works. You have the fire department that reviews drawings. You have utilities that need to review and make sure that the water system or the sewer system can accommodate the demands that this building will put on the infrastructure. And all of those departments have fees. And then on top of it, more than likely, there are park fees. There are school fees. So this becomes a very lengthy process and also a very expensive process. Again, with good intentions, but other outcomes that have really impacted our ability to produce housing.
Now, you mentioned the good intentions. Is it to make sure that the house is built safe?
That is correct. Though, ironically, if anything were to happen to the house later on, the building department has no liability. The liability falls on the architect, which is fine. This process that involves these departments, there's really no liability on their part, and in many ways, no energy or to approve these things quickly. And I think, particularly with this tragedy, we need to all work together collaboratively on the same side as a team and work through these issues quickly and help these people. These are folks that aren't asking to add more square footage or so. These are folks that generally want to build what they had before. And we know that these buildings were functioning in the environment with the infrastructure, and they should be approved very quickly. And we actually, I am the co-chair for the American Institute of Architects Housing Steering Committee, and we are floating a number of ideas right now. One of the ideas is, this has been brought up through the governor's office as well, as if you're going to rebuild what was there, building on the same foundation, give or take 10%, the same square footage, it should be by right. And I would suggest or even add, if the architect certifies the project is code compliant, and the contractor certifies that what the contractor builds is code compliant, that we skip the permit process, the building permit process, which would save many, many months of time, because we're really just building what was there before.
So essentially, what do you mean it should be by right? Do you mean that people should have the right to build, or do they have to still get permission?
Right now, there is a lot of permission that needs to be done in a traditional process.
So in a traditional process, you have to start over from zero. You have to say,
Right.
I want to build a house. Can you give me permission?
Right.
But here, ideally, there is no permissioning process. It's just, you just can build.
Right. I think there's a couple of things that our agencies could do. Many of the homes that have been built over the last several decades are on record at the cities. And the cities have these records of drawing sets and approvals. What would be ideal is if someone wants to rebuild, that the city says, well, we have your set of drawings. Here they are. You can build it by right now. You do not have to go through planning or building or public works or through utilities or the fire department. It should just be by right. And that would help with cost and time, and I think bring a certain level of certainty for these people that they will get this done, not in 10 years or 5 years, but much, much quicker.
You know, unfortunately, other places have not been able to expedite this, right?
Yeah. There was a large fire, as you know, in Lahaina, and it was about 18 months ago, and I know the community is working on a recovery plan. We are now in 2025, and it has not been approved yet. They are hoping to approve it this year. But from what I understand, very few homes have been built. Just a handful of homes are under construction or built, and there's very little progress. And that's not a good way to build a community back quickly. The City of Paradise, which I think is probably a much more developer-friendly environment, is the fire that ravaged their community 6 years ago has now completed about 2,500 homes where people are occupying them and living in them, but 18,000 structures were destroyed there. And that was 6 years ago. So we, as Angelenos, need to find a faster way to rebuild, not only for the residents that have lost their homes, but to just free up more housing stock in general for our state.
If you can tell us about the process. So if somebody wants to rebuild, and if they don't make any changes, so you have to go to different departments, getting approval from, touch a lot of different departments to get approval, right?
In the traditional process, and I think our recommendation would be that if the intent is to build what was there before, and that the architect is willing to certify that it will be built to code, that a permit should be approved over the counter within a matter of days, not months, but days. If there are drawings that are there that the city has, that that owners, architect, and builder could work from, it will just speed up the process dramatically. If the owner were to build or to hire an architect and to start drawings from scratch, that process also takes many, many months. It's all about just removing months of time to actually get these homes going. And that's not to say to build it exactly the way it was. Maybe there are some improvements that we want to make. Perhaps we might want to consider sprinklers on the outside of the building, or a cistern or a water tank under the house that when fire conditions become imminent, that instead of putting all the pressure on the public water system, if these homes had water tanks, potentially the water could be pumped from those tanks to help wet the area on the house or in the area, so in the future we don't have such a calamity like we've had the last week.
In a normal process, if there is no expediting, it takes, you mentioned it takes a year to do the permitting, and how long does it take for the construction?
Well, construction can take another year to 2 years, depending on the complexity of the home. And you also have to accommodate time for the architect to create the drawings, which takes 6 to 9 months to a year as well. So all of a sudden, in a traditional sense, it can take several, 2 to 3 years plus to just start the construction of a home. And I think one of the questions I have with the governor's directive about eliminating CEQA and the coastal is that it's only valid for a year. And that's not enough time for many folks. Think about if you lose your home, it might take you several months or half a year just to get reestablished, to find a home, a temporary place to live, to continue working, to decide if I want to rebuild or if I want to leave. And then to start that process in the traditional sense will take many years, and the governor's directive, which is very positive first step, I hope will be extended for many years too.
And the insurance may not reimburse that fast, right?
Well, that depends on each insurance company, and many of the homes may not be insured to the level that's required to rebuild. It might be, some folks may have insurance that's a reimbursement at $400 per square foot. Well, many homes now cost $1,000 a square foot to build, so who's going to pay for that difference? There's a lot of decisions outside of I just want to build another house back where I was. There's a lot of decisions that take time to sort through for these owners to really decide how they want to proceed. And I think this idea of just making it easier, not impacting the health, safety, and welfare of a community or of a resident, but there is a lot of bureaucracy and red tape that we can cut through to expedite.
Some people have been saying that the Coastal Commission may not permit these homes to be built, but with governor's new directive, this is going away, right?
It appears that way. The proof will be in the first few homes that apply to be rebuilt, and I think these first few homes that do go through the approval process should be scrutinized closely, not to put blame on any decisions, but to further refine the process and improve it so that we can approve things even quicker over time.
Now, in terms of, you mentioned the architect would certify. Can you explain how does that work?
So the architect would actually sign a form that certifies that the building complies with current codes. And I've actually done this a number of times in the city of Bellflower. The certification process is not unusual in this country. It's allowed in New York City, it's allowed in Chicago, in Phoenix, in Bellflower, of all places in Southern California. And I've actually certified 3 projects there. One was an outdoor urban eatery that took about 15,000 square feet. Another project was the adaptive reuse of an old department store that we converted into creative offices, and that was about 40,000 square feet. And then also a development or a project for the city itself, a homeless shelter that houses 50 folks, gets them off the street and lives in the shelter. So it was a process I was very comfortable with. It was a very collaborative process with the city, but essentially we had a very brief planning review, and then we completely cut out the permitting process completely. And the city still, during construction, came out and reviewed the work as it was proceeding to make sure that it was code compliant. It was a very positive direction. Again, this mindset of collaborating and being partners and not fighting each other is very important. And I would be happy to, again, certify projects that I have knowledge about and feel comfortable that they are compliant.
And do you think other architects would do the same for this rebuilding? Because these are the projects that are somebody else.
Absolutely. I think it'll be on an individual basis. I think there will be a lot of architects that would be willing to do that. Again, I don't think it needs to be a requirement. I think it's a choice. And if an owner wants to go the traditional route and have the city review the projects, that's absolutely fine. They just have to understand it will take longer. And this just becomes another tool in the toolkit for a homeowner to decide, I want to go this route because I'd like to expedite it. And
how much faster will it be if the architects would actually certify instead of the city?
I think it could be close to a year.
So that's something that LA should seriously consider because this could help expedite.
I think so. I absolutely think so. I think the other item too associated with it is, as I mentioned earlier, the fees. Since there is no permit review, I think those fees should be waived. There could be a fee for reviewing on-site inspections, but that fee could be cut down dramatically by 85–90%. So that would be another way of helping these homeowners in terms of moving forward faster and saving money.
So your recommendation and your organization, Association of Architects, you guys are thinking this is the best way in this scenario to actually maybe to do the big heavy lifting when the building is happening. Maybe the government, the city can come and inspect it, but during the planning phase, you guys do the work because you're already on the hook, right?
Right. We are the experts, and we did take a vow of when we became architects to make sure that the health, safety, and welfare of the occupants in the community are taken into account. And as I work on buildings, I always look at what our client wants, and I always want to create beautiful buildings and functional buildings, but at the same time, safety is always the number one priority for all of us.
We are honored to be sponsored by Shenyun. Shenyun Performing Arts is reviving 5,000 years of lost Chinese traditional culture. It takes you back in time to the magical world of ancient China with a unique blend of brilliant dancing, beautiful costumes, and legends coming to life. The show choreography and production values are top-notch. However, it isn't just the technical ability of the dancers, it's the inner beauty and the devotion of the artist that will stir your soul to move you to tears. Make sure to go see it this year. Go to shenyun.com and book your tickets today.
It was spectacular, so beautiful.
I thought I was going to heaven.
Oh, it was electric.
I'm getting chills talking about it.
It gets a 10 from me, that's for sure.
It was that good.
Absolutely marvelous.
Hands down the best show I've ever seen.
What else do you recommend to the city of LA? Should they have a separate department to expedite that is focused on these fires, or should they have a different pool of resources so that they can process faster?
I think that would be really helpful. About 60% of the permits pulled in Southern California or in Los Angeles are homes. So there is already an expertise that's there, and I think that those folks should either be pulled into a separate department or continue with this skill set and understanding this certification process. I think to your point, having a separate department where there is a group focused on thinking of this day and night is really important.
That you're just focused on the fire-related. And what about architects and development resources? How's that going to look like in LA? Because a lot of people want to build. Are you guys busy?
I think with interest rates increasing over the last year, they are starting to soften a bit now and come down. But there was a slowdown in market rate housing, multifamily and single family, because of the change in interest rates. So I think a lot of architectural firms do have room to take on additional work. This work won't all come at once. Some people will, and I know some people are already calling architects to say, hey, I want to rebuild my dad's home, or I want to rebuild our home. Let's get started. So there are some people that are starting right now, but others are going to take time. Others are going to first have to get reestablished, get their children back into school, continue working, negotiate with their insurance companies. And so some people will take longer before they start. So this won't all happen necessarily at once, but it will happen over a few years, and I think that'll help the industry absorb this work. But I think, again, one of my biggest concerns is that we don't want to clog this up at City Hall or with the county, that we want to be all good neighbors and work together to expedite the process once a homeowner decides to pull a trigger and move forward.
Do you think you guys should meet with the city and county about these fires? Do you think there should be some meetings between you guys, the development community?
Absolutely. And I know there is talk of having some meetings soon, and I think now is the right time to lay this foundation out, discuss the opportunities and constraints, and work on it now. Not a year from now, not 6 months from now, but right now, today. We really need to set a clear course for certainty for these homeowners so that they can make informed decisions on how they want to move forward.
Michael, are you guys worried in your field, because you have seen some of the bureaucracy? Are you worried that a couple of years out it might end up being like paradise? Or
Well, I would hope that would be all of our goals, is to avoid the long, time-consuming process. I know there are some deep concerns about hardening, and maybe I can describe what hardening is. It's taking a home and making it more fire resistive, and taking the land, let's say 100 feet around the home, and making it less susceptible to burning. And I think adding that on is useful, but at the same time, we don't want to get bogged down with this. So I think this is when we should be talking about hardening. Should there be sprinklers on the outside of the building? Should there be cisterns or water tanks on each property? Should the utilities underground the electrical lines, especially in these neighborhoods that have been completely devastated and cleared out? Is this the time now to come in and trench and do that work? In terms of hardening, all vents that let air into the house should have spark arresters that prevent sparks from coming in. That's a very common way for a house to burn. Should there be proper landscaping around the home that isn't so susceptible to burning? And again, maintenance, older dead plant material, or even leaves in gutters, or leaves that collect in corners. When embers burn and land on those, that's how a home starts to ignite. So all of these things should be talked about right now, and a few additions or thoughts should be added in a very clear, concise way, again, to simplify this process and make it very clear to the homeowner what the expectation is.
So are you worried that this conversation may drag for a while, and then it could become very vague? And
it could. And
then it would confuse the departments that are overseeing,
right. And there could be inconsistent
laws that
decisions made by individual reviewers or inspectors that will ultimately result in delay and more costs.
Michael, you guys have decided to put these list of recommendations together and come forward at this time. Why did you guys decide that?
Well, we are experts at building. We all have ways to contribute to society and to help people that are in need. And for us, this is the most powerful way we can help influence and help our community.
You seem to care a lot about this development process. How did you get into this?
I really do love my job. I've enjoyed just building and problem solving since I was a child. I am an only child. I was able to build with Legos and Lincoln Logs and blocks, and I could take our den and just build entire cities and buildings, and it was so much fun, and I enjoyed doing that. And this is really an extension of that childhood, of continuing to solve problems and building and helping other people. And I also just love ideas. And I think, with this tragedy, trying to come up with ideas to expedite this process of helping people is really important. And when people suggest potential solutions and then trying to connect the dots to actually make it happen, because there's always the opportunity of having an idea, but then how do you execute it? How does that come about to bring goodness in a process that helps us all?
And for your ideas to get taken into consideration, what needs to happen? Do you need to have meetings, or do you need to get to the right people?
Well, first of all, within our organization, there are other architects that are way smarter than I am. And so we've been emailing and calling each other and discussing this and developing a plan of action and of suggestions that we'd then like to share with governing bodies.
And what about the homeowners who may have unfortunately lost their home in this tragedy? Do you have any recommendations for them?
I think from their perspective as well, reaching out to the agencies and understanding what is available to help us now, what path are these governing agencies taking to expedite this process. And I would suggest that they, in the near future, come to our American Institute of Architects website and review our recommendations and see if they will be applicable to their governing, their local governing organization.
You mentioned that the governor's directive has only 1 year for the Coastal Commission and the CEQA. Do you think people should get started now, the people that intend to rebuild?
Absolutely. I do think if someone's committed to rebuilding, they should start now. We want this housing to be built over time. We want some people to start right away. Others will be waiting and deciding what they want to do. And I think starting now, there are resources available. If everybody were to build at once, I'm not sure we have enough contractors, enough builders to do this. So the early ones will have some risk with governing agencies on the approval process, but once they have those approvals, they'll be at the beginning of construction, and there is some availability in terms of the industry to help build.
What about the public side of it? Have you guys thought about the schools and the public properties that were lost in the fires? How does that work?
I think the governing agencies that oversee those institutions are going to have to do the same thing. They may want to build something temporary to accommodate the demand that was there. And then at the same time, what are the long-term goals? Will they rebuild the school? Can they rebuild the facility better and stronger so that it is less prone to fire in the future? I think the other thing too is there are a lot of small businesses that have been hit. And I know we've spoken a lot about homeowners, but a lot of these small businesses that have lost their buildings will need a similar process of approval to expedite and get them up and running and making money again so that they can support their families.
Do you guys oversee the construction side of it too?
Absolutely.
So you will see the end result?
Yes.
And when you're doing the self-certification, do you oversee the construction side as well, or you certify that as well?
We let the contractor certify it. We review the construction to make sure it's consistent with what was drawn. But the contractor, we're not out there every day to see every decision that is made. So we generally look at the progress of the work, but like I said, we're not out there every hour watching every nail being put in. So the contractor actually needs to also certify that his work is compliant with our work. And I think that's another important point, to bring in the government inspectors to actually be that third eye to protect a homeowner's interests.
And so they're protecting, but at the same time, in this case, it might take long, right? Does it take long when they come to inspect the construction?
Well, they may need to transfer people that maybe aren't reviewing drawings at the permit level into the field to review this work, because you're right, they could get overwhelmed by the amount of inspections.
This is a lot of structures for LA, right?
Yeah, and they're all being built at different times. It's not as if an inspector can just go around and review everything in one swoop. They're done at different times, at different stages. So there's going to be a personnel crunch that cities need to start thinking about now.
Do you think these areas will get rebuilt?
I think they will get rebuilt, but probably not as fast as many of our officials hope that they will, because there will just be there just inherently are things that slow things down beyond everybody's control. And how fast will the insurance companies disperse the money? How responsive will government be to making sure the streets and the infrastructure is all operating and in place? So if you build a home, but you're not connected, and the power lines or the water lines aren't effective, you can't occupy the home. So the infrastructure needs to be set in place, and that's independent of any of the property owners.
So there needs to be infrastructure from the city, from the utility companies. Right. That's one side of it.
It may be all there from the fire. I don't know if anybody knows yet, but probably is some infrastructure that needs to be upgraded. There was discussion, I think we'll learn more about it over time, about if there's sufficient water reservoirs for the area. There may need to be additional reservoirs built. These are all things that need to also be looked at the same time.
And Michael, you have been working on the state. You guys have been doing a lot of developments, a lot of planning. And what are the challenges the state is facing when it comes to building new housing?
Well, as I mentioned before, we're about 3.5 million units shy in the state. Last year, our Housing Steering Committee came up with 5 points that we really want to address this year. One of them is reforming condo liability. It's very difficult to build condominiums in this state. Condominiums can be more affordable than a single-family home and can many times be that first step to ownership, to creating wealth. So right now, in terms of multifamily housing, only 3% of the housing that is built are condominiums. The rest are apartments. For rent.
Become rentals. They become
Exactly.
rentals, yeah. That's why we're seeing a lot of rentals. Can you explain to us what is the liability that causes?
So this is probably an entire show in itself, but there is a responsibility by the developer, the architect, and the contractor that the building is defect-free for 10 years. And that is a very broad term. And what happens is at year 9 or 9.5, an attorney may go to a condominium association. This is once the building's been up and operating for 9 years, and say to the association, do you have any defects or any problems?
So you can sue the developer.
Exactly. And what has become very confusing is the difference between a true defect that was either built incorrectly or designed incorrectly and maintenance, where things have fallen into disrepair due to the lack of maintenance.
Because it's 10 years, it's a long time.
That's correct. So there is maintenance that's required, and buildings can have problems if they aren't maintained over those 10 years. So that becomes very fuzzy and poses a tremendous amount of risk that does not motivate developers to build condominiums at this point.
So they just build rental units.
Correct.
And what are the other 4?
So another one is the adaptive reuse of commercial buildings to housing. So maybe a simpler word is just office to housing conversions. We have an excess of office supply over the last few years. In fact, the entire country has close to 1 billion square feet of excess office space, or will have an excess space. And so some of these buildings can be converted into housing and can be converted in a more costly approach, a more environmentally appropriate approach, because you're using materials that are already in place, and can be more unique and can be wonderful places to live. I've personally done a number of them, and they actually are quite popular. But there are policies and codes that are problematic in many communities to continuing to allow that to happen. The third one has to do with commercial prevailing wage. When we work on affordable housing, the buildings are required to be built at a prevailing wage level, which is fine. But if a building wants to be built at 5 stories instead of 4 stories, commercial prevailing wage kicks in, and that adds another 30%, 25 to 30% more to construction. So a lot of our developers don't build that top
That's
floor.
why we don't see the more than 4-story buildings, right?
Particularly with affordable housing. As an architect or a developer going through this entire process of approvals that we talked about, and then seeing that we can't build to the true maximum because of that cost, is something we want to try to work out and see if there's another option. The California Residential Code that we'd like to see be used more often, not only for single-family homes, but for townhomes and row homes. It's an easier code to work within. We think there's some opportunities there that can help expedite the production of housing. And then finally is this idea of a building permit state appeals board. So if you think about, we have around 500 different cities within California, and if each of those cities has its own building department, and each of them are reviewing projects for code-related issues, the code book doesn't deal with every issue that comes up on an individual project, so there are these gray areas of interpretation. And when you have 500 different cities that many times have different interpretations of the code, it can be a very costly and frustrating process. And I think what we would like the state to consider is there is a state appeals board, but it's not being used properly or adequately right now. And if a developer could appeal or question a local decision that's made by a building official to the state level, and the state level makes a decision on that appeal that gets published, that can then become a tool or a framework for all these other cities to follow. And it's about just trying to bring more consistency into the process. The state fire marshal has that process now, and it's actually working quite well. And you can actually look online at some of the appeals that have been approved, and they become, in a way, a softer way of adopting when a unique issue comes up, how it can be resolved. And it gives cover for the local agencies then to say, well, the state has approved this, I feel comfortable approving it as well.
Michael Bohn with American Institute of Architects, it was great to have you on California Insider.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.